Welcome, everybody. This is Israel Levitt here for Virtual Kollel this morning. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whenever you're seeing this. And we're about to go ahead and just start another session in Virtual Kollel. And we're going to be looking at the end of the Book of Ruth, Sefer Ruth. And although the holiday of Shavuot has passed, we're still going to go ahead and complete things as we transition to the next series that we're going to be working with. So I'm so glad you're joining me today. And without further ado, what I want to do is go ahead and show you my screen here, share my screen with you. There we go. Perfect. And so here we go. Here's my screen that I'm sharing with you, and I think it's large enough here that we'll go ahead and look at this together. And so here we are. We have three different sites that we're using to go ahead and share things. And I just want to make sure, looks like everything's looking okay here. Okay, perfect. In the past, we've had some trouble with the technology here, but it looks like everything's good. So where we left off. Okay, so we left off here with Boaz, and he had come to the gates, to the city gates, basically the town hall. And so he was with the person who's the Goel, who we don't know, whose name we don't know. He's basically just simply called Ploni Almoni. Ploni Almoni meaning basically so-and-so. We talked also a little bit about what Rashi has to say about that, about Ploni Almoni. So he tells him Shvu po, he does. He tells him sit here, he does. He tells he calls 10 men essentially as witnesses. We talked about that last time together as well. And basically what happens, excuse me, is he now goes through some legal proceedings in terms of basically a kind of court almost being in session now. It's not exactly a court we observed, because courts in Jewish law are not allowed to have equal numbers of people that make up the witnesses. And here we have 10 men, and so obviously that wouldn't be an amount that would be the legal proceeding for a court. However, the text does refer to them as witnesses. Let's see if we can look here in the English to go ahead and help here. Okay. So it's pulling up. Okay. And I think it uses the word witness or testify or something like that. I'm just using English here to pull it up a little bit closer. Oh, I think here we go. Let's see here. Okay, well, let's just start from verse 7. Now this is the custom in former times in Israel concerning redemption. In exchange to confirm anything, one would remove his shoe and give it to his fellow, and this was the attestation in Israel. That's the word. Ha te'uda be'Yisrael. So that's basically telling us that there was an exchange that had taken place, and there are witnesses. Now, witnesses, you could have as many witnesses as you need in order to make a legal ruling on a matter. You're not allowed to have an even number of judges. And so it seems that this really was just a simple transaction that really didn't need the force of a court. Let's go ahead and drop down to verse 8 here. And the near kinsman said to Boaz, buy it for yourself, and he removed his shoe. Now, what had happened, by the way, let's go back up and just get a little bit more context here. And he's basically, Boaz says to him, on the day that you buy the field from the hand of Naomi and from Ruth Hamoaviyah, and Ruth the Moabitess, the wife of the deceased, you have bought it. Let me go ahead and move this really so you can see the Hebrew. There we go. The wife of the deceased, you have bought it to preserve the name of the deceased. And as soon as he throws in that Ruth is going to basically be a package deal, since it's her family's field. Obviously, it's her family by marriage, but her family's field. She basically is going to be quasi a yibum situation, a situation of quasi levirate marriage. But really, it's all about the next of kin who takes care of the property rights and things like that. Near kinsman basically responds, "I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I mar my heritage. You redeem my redemption for yourself." And we talked about that. And so then we have the exchanging of a shoe, which we saw. And Boaz said to the elders and the entire people, "You are witnesses today that I have bought all that was Elimelech's and all that was Chilion and Machlon's from Nomi, and also Ruth the Moabitess, Machlon's wife." So here we learn that Machlon is her husband, as we said, pointed out before. "Have acquired for myself for a wife to preserve the name of the deceased on his heritage, so that the name of the deceased not be obliterated from his brethren, from the gate of his place. You are witnesses today." So here we go. Here exactly is the purpose of this group, Edim Atem Hayom, that you're witnesses today. So these aren't judges; they're not dayanim or anything like that, but they're witnesses. Verse 11. "And all the people who were in the gate and the elders replied, 'We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is entering your house like Rachel and like Leah, both of whom built up the house of Israel, and prosper in Ephrata and be famous in Bethlehem.'" So now here we get the people who are in the gates and the elders replying by giving words of blessing. Continue on. "And may your house be like the house of Peretz." Peretz obviously is the progenitor of the ancestor of this whole entire tribe, obviously coming from Yehuda, whom Tamar bore to Yehuda, to Judah, with the seed of the Lord, and with the seed that the Lord will give you from his maiden. There we go. Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife, and he was intimate with her, and the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. Now the women basically are responding, "Blessed is the Lord, who did not deprive you of a redeemer today, and may his name be famous in Israel." Good morning. Good morning. So we're in chapter 15. Definitely pull up a chair, pull up a Bible, etc. So we're just kind of reviewing a little bit. No, I'm sorry, not chapter 15. Verse 15 of chapter 4 of Ruth. Yeah. Yeah, sorry, I misspoke. And so basically, we're talking about, just to go ahead and bring you up to speed, we're talking about the incident where we're in chapter 4, obviously. So we're talking about. Oh, very cool. Thank you. So we're talking about the giving of Ruth. Excuse me, the buying of the property of Ruth, and how the Ploni Almoni, the so and so guy, we don't know his name, and the text deliberately does not name him. How he is does not take over the land, and so Boaz takes over the land, and then so the men and the witnesses there in the gate, in the town gate, they give him a blessing, and then the women give him a blessing. Verse 15. "And may he be to restore of life and to sustain." Verse 14 and 15. So we'll just go ahead and read that really quickly here again. "And the women said to Naomi, 'Blessed is the Lord who did not deprive you of a redeemer today. And may his name be famous in Israel.'" So Boaz obviously is famous in Israel in more ways than one. "And may he be to you a restorer of life and to sustain your old age, for your daughter-in-law who loves you bore him, and she is better to you than 7 sons." So it's interesting because that phrase, "better to you than 7 sons," we see in verse 15 of chapter 4. So who's the famous descendant? The same famous descendant of this family with 7 sons. Remember. So Boaz bears Obed. Obed bears Yishai. right, but the descendant specifically from this particular family is Yishai, right? And Yishai has seven sons, and who's the best or the better? David is the better of the seven sons, right? So a lot of people point to this blessing, right, as looking forward as a a prophecy in disguise almost that the better of seven sons is going to be the one who's going to rule Eretz Yisrael. So now we're taking up basically we're starting verse 16, and we have a couple more verses to go, which are pretty simple verses. And then I want to go ahead and look at some related things that will be hopefully interesting. Vatikach Noami et hayeled v'tishtehu becheka. And Naomi placed the child and took the child and placed him in her bosom. And let's go to Sfaria. I'm curious to see what's going to happen here. They're going to more. They're going to have more commentaries. Give me a second. I'm just changing here. Okay. Um, and laid it in her bosom and became nurse to it. Right. So it's interesting because a couple different things. Okay, I see. There's a comment from the Ibn Ezra. Let's see here. We'll explore that really quickly. Okay, so he's just talking a little bit about the grammar, but basically, um, she became a nurse to it. So it's interesting because one, it doesn't really mention Ruth anymore, and another interesting thing too is that ostensibly, like, how come Boaz didn't marry Naomi? Because Naomi really is, as the matriarch of the family, she's the one also that had a husband who died, who also has property, and so it seems to me that Boaz didn't marry Naomi because she's probably too old to bear children. But then here, almost like as if it's miraculous, you have her, nursing, being the nurse, or at least in some instances, being a nurse um, to Ruth's son, to Obed. Does it say anything interesting, by the way, in verse 16 there?
And became his nurse. The Alstic explains that Naomi was miraculously able to nurse a child. It became manifestly clear to all that Malka's memory had been perpetuated through the child, and in the spiritual sense, a child truly had been born to Naomi in the spiritual sense.
Interesting. Yeah, so the Alshach, yeah, has that basic same understanding that I've heard. Maybe it probably came from him that, yeah, spiritually she had a child, obviously, but then also she miraculously was able to nurse.
And then in the next verse, it says, "A son is born to Naomi." The Talmud remarks, Sanhedrin 19b, "Was it then Naomi who bore him? Surely it was Ruth who bore him. But Ruth bore, and Naomi brought him up. Hence he was called after Naomi's name because she raised him."
Yeah, interesting. So that's an interesting phrase. It says, "Zmehercha v'tikra not v'tikrana lo, hashchon Shem lemer yalad bo lenomi." Yeah, ben lenomi. Interesting. So they called him. Um, they called him. Uh, yeah, hashchenot Shem lemer. Um, what's Yeah, interesting. So that is an interesting thing right there. V'tikrana lo hashchenot. The neighbor is called Shem Lemor. They called it. They called him a name, or the child a name, saying, "Yulad ben Naomi." There's a son born to Naomi. V'tikrana shemo Oved, and they called his name Oved. Hu Avi Yishai Avi David. He's the father of Jesse, the father of David. Now, interesting, his name Oved. Oved basically means servant. So it's a very interesting name to go by. In terms of his servant, that perhaps he is a servant to restore, in one sense, to restore the house of David back to, because if you think about it, I mean, he doesn't restore the house of David. Excuse me, he establishes the house of David. So in one sense, he's almost a servant to, Melech David, until the whole lineage that's gonna go on. Verse 18. Ve'ele toledot peretz holid es chetzron. Now, this is very interesting, and you won't see this. I'm sure they're going to bring it out in there. Um, yeah. So here we have a lot of commentaries on this. Okay. So toledot here, the word toledot, the second word in Hebrew in verse 18, is written what they call male. So you have the words, yeah, you have the letters, huh? Yeah, with two vavs. You have the letters tav, lamed, dalet. Obviously tav at the end, but then the two vavs right there, you don't need those two vavs. You could just simply have cholam, just like a dot over the tav or over the dalet, and so it's interesting because Shnei Luchot Abrit has a comment on this, and so I'm just going to go. He brings from the Bereshit Rabbah. It draws our attention. Hey, good morning. Attention to the fact that Toledot, descendants, is always spelled without the letter Vav after the Tav, except when the Torah describes Toledot Hashemayim Va'aretz. So the only other place in the whole Tanakh that Toledot is spelled like that is speaking about the conclusion of the creation. Right. Right. So it's very interesting. And when the descendants of parrots are described in Ruth 4:18, which is our verse, the reason is that when the Messiah arrives, the world will be renewed. Oh, there we go. Progress was deficient in some way during all the years between Genesis 2:4, which is the ending of the completion of creation, and the arrival of the Messiah, a direct descendant of parrots. The reason the Torah appends the report about Yehuda, his sons, etc., to the sale of Joseph is to underline that both Joseph and Yehuda played a part in the resumption of the trend towards a more perfect world, towards realizing the Creator's objective in creating the universe. So I just thought it was a very interesting, very astute comment by Rabbi Yeshaya Horowitz, who they call the Shlah.
Judah was avoided here in the listing of the generations begins with parrots to avoid evoking the memory of the Judah Tamar incident, which was embarrassing to many. Ageris, Shemuel, Meshib, Nephish, and commentary of Ishmael, Baraka, and verse 12.
Interesting. So very, very interesting. Let's go down to verse 19 here. Chatzron, V'chatzron holid es Ram, Ram holid es Aminadav. Let's see here. We'll just go ahead and finish up for today with looking at this, but because I want to look at a couple different things, so we'll look at the rest of this here. Let's see. There we go. Aminadav holid es Nachshon, Nachshon holid es Salma, Salmon, the Salmon. Oh, it's interesting. It says his name Salma and not Salmon. That's very interesting. Okay, let's see if there are any commenters. There's no.
He's sometimes called Salmon. That's all it says. He was the brother of Elimelech and Tov. That's all it says.
Okay. V'Salmon holid es Boaz, Boaz holid es Ovid, Ovid holid es Yishai, Yishai holid es David.
I think it's interesting. This is my own thought that Ovid isn't called Evid. Evid is the noun. Ovid is the present participle of the verb. Continual service and worship
Yeah.
of God. It's the action of his whole life was service and worship.
Very interesting. That's very, very interesting. I want to go ahead and take us one more to a couple different places. So you won't have it in there. Let's see. You might have it in some of the other books you brought, but go ahead and get, if you don't, either a Sidur or the Book of Mishlei or a Tanakh, I guess. Usually a scholar carries. Okay, Sidor. So go ahead and turn to Proverbs 31. And we'll look at something that I think is pretty interesting in Proverbs 31. I'm turning to it over here as well. Well, it's gonna be in the Friday night service. Yeah, yeah.
I'm in Shavuot Shabbat.
I gotcha.
So I'm going to. Hmm,
There we
I don't
go.
know where Asian tile is in there because I don't use it from here.
Let's see here. I don't think there is. I can find it really quickly if you want me to.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm close,
yeah.
but so far
Here you
I'm
go.
good.
Yeah, I just happened to turn to it pretty quickly.
All right.
Okay, so let's look, and we're opening here in verse 10 on this on everybody's screen, and obviously have just Eshet Chayil right there. Now, verse 10 starts an acrostic, with the first word being all, starting with Allah, the second word starting with Beit, and so on. And oh no, sorry. The next word with Gimel. And so here we have the word Eshet Chayil. Now, Eshet Chayil, there's only one woman that's called. It's used three times in the whole Tanakh. So it's used here, another place in Proverbs, and it's used to speak about Ruth. So already, I mean, it's pretty square that we're talking about Ruth here in this poem. But let's just go through, some verses. A woman of valor who can find for prices beyond pearls. Her husband relies on her, and he will lack no gain. So it's interesting. Batzak bah lev balah. Her husband relies on her. Well, her machlon obviously can't do anything anymore because he's passed away. If we're talking to Ruth, so he's relying on her, right, to go ahead and carry the lineage. But let's continue on.
I've got a real quick commentary on Eshet Chayil.
Sure.
Eshet is somewhat backwardsly alluding to Hashem himself because there's an aleph at the beginning and a tav at the end. And
Ah,
the sheen usually refers to the mystery. And it's sometimes used as a backdoor way to refer to Hashem himself.
interesting.
So God mysteriously hides himself in this woman. The
Uh,
chai, if you take off the lamed, is life. So you have the aleph tav in a mystery of life, and lamed is usually the prefix used for a purpose. So
mhm.
through this woman, God is hiding himself, giving life for a purpose, and she continues on the lineage of Hashem to the next generations.
Wow, that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing with that. That's very beautiful. Let's skip down here to here we go to verse 16. So it's interesting because it says here. Let's see. Do I want to go? Yeah, verse 16. "Tzama v'tikachehu." So she contemplates a field and purchases it. Mipri chapeha natakarim. Uh, not Natakarim. And from the fruit of her hand she plants a vineyard. So here we have definitely a picture of Ruth. Obviously, where we're talking about purchasing of fields, and then also we're talking about fruit of her hands. So this is definitely alluding to. And I'm sorry, for you, we're in the Zion passage. Obviously, you don't have verses. I didn't. Um,
I'm with you.
yeah, and so uh, obviously we have Ruth, in terms of in the fields, providing for Noemi and the purchasing of a field that we just had right now. But here, in my mind, is the kicker. I mean, if you're not convinced yet that this is talking about Ruth, look at the line for chet. It says chogra
Boaz.
boaz matzneha, and she girds her loins with vigor, but she girds her loins with Boaz. And extends her arms. Again, extending, you know,
I
ex-
saw that before.
yeah, isn't that interesting? It's very, very interesting. Also, we can skip down all the way to, let's see here. Where do I want to go? Um, let's see here. Um, yeah, so 23. 23. So noon for you. So if you look at noon b'sha'arim ba'Allah b'shivto im ziknei aretz. Her husband is known in the gates when he sits down with the elders of the land. Yeah, everything same thing right there. And if you continue on going all the way down, in verse 31 here in the Tav, Tanu la mi priya deha vihalaluha v'sharim maseha. Yep, give her the fruit of her hands, and her deeds will praise her in the gates. Yeah, exactly. So there's one more. There's one further place that I want to go, um, and let's just go ahead and look here. Hold on. This you will definitely have to get from maybe over in the sanctuary, or maybe there's one around here or something like that. The Book of Matthew,
Oh, yeah.
or maybe you have. I don't know.
I just grabbed one from the pew.
Yeah.
I'll be right back. Hang on. Oh, there might be one. We got a couple here. Used to. I'll grab one. Oh, here's one. Matthew what?
Just chapter 1.
Genealogy.
Oh no, you can. This is for you.
Okay.
Yeah. So genealogies are funny things because a lot of times they're skipped over and passed over. However, not only they're extremely important, in the context of the culture, but they're extremely important, I think, for establishing connections and establishing a lineage and establishing importance. So
There are 14 generations from Abraham to Ishai, 14 from David to Yoshiahu, and then 14 from Yoshiahu to Joah.
right,
And those all, David is the gematria of 14, so all these are David, David, David.
right. It's 100%. Now I haven't worked it out yet, but we're gonna see maybe a couple cool things. So here in the first paragraph, if you will, from verse 2 to verse 6, we obviously have exactly what we just saw from Ruth. So it's almost just kind of carries on from Ruth. Abraham was the father of Isaac, Isaac the father of Jacob, Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers. Judah was the father of Peretz and Zerach by Tamar. So here, obviously, that leaves it out in the previous genealogy of Ruth, as you said, not to kind of embarrass and bring up that situation with Judah and Tamar. But here we're going to take note of it. So Tamar, we're going to call her one. Peretz was the father of Chetzron, Chetzron the father of Ram, Ram the father of Aminadav, Aminadav the father of Nachshon, Nachshon the father of Salmon, Salmon the father of Boaz by Rahab. Okay. Um, so Rachav right there is a second. We're going to call number 2. That's a second mention of a woman here. Boaz was the father of Obed by Ruth. That's number 3. Okay, and Obed the father of Jesse. Jesse was the father of David, the king. And so really we have 3 mentions right there of women, and then you have the very next one. David was the father of Shlomo, Solomon by Bathsheba. So there you have 4. So it's interesting. You have 4 mentions of women that have some intrigue in terms of their, and good morning, in terms of their lineage, right? So it's very, I mean, you have Tamar who prostitutes herself, and seduces her father-in-law. You have Rachav, who was basically a brothel owner and a prostitute herself. Then you have, good morning. And then you have Ruth, who was, a woman who's obviously from, who is a foreign woman, a Moabia. And there's all kinds of intrigue whether she can marry, whether she can't marry, whether the lineage would be, acceptable within Israel or not. And then obviously you have Bathsheba, who has the whole issue with Uriah and everything like that, and David using Uriah and seemingly having committing adultery with Bathsheba, and then killing off Uriah. So there's murky waters. There's very murky waters. And so I wanted to read something actually from this book. So thank you for getting that. And so this is the book of Ruth. Just to hold this up to the camera here. This is the Book of Ruth by Art Scroll, and Rabbi Nosson Sherman is the author of the introduction, the commentary here. And so he has some very interesting things to say about this, because basically, I mean, if you think about it, how could somebody as illustrious and holy as the Messiah have such a negative background, basically? Let's go ahead and look at something here that he talks about. Okay, so he comments here on a verse from Genesis Rabbah, and he said, "Who can withdraw purity from impurity?" A verse from Job. So the commentary in Genesis Rabbah continues. Abraham came from Terach, Hezekiah from Achaz. Okay, so both of those, Terach obviously was an idol maker. People asked him, how's business? He said, "Thank God's." you know, Achaz obviously was a wicked king. Yoshiah from Ammon, who also was somebody wicked. Mordechai from Shimi. Israel from the nations. The world to come from this world. Who could do this? Who could command this? Who could decree this? No one but God, the only one on earth. In a deeper sense, there is more to the strange and distasteful circumstances surrounding Lot, Judah, and Ruth than simply just appeasing the Satan. That's what he says previously in this commentary here. There is a constant refrain in Kabbalistic and esoteric literature that this world is a mixture of good and evil, symbolized by Eitz Hadas Tov V'Ra, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. In all evil there is some good, otherwise it could not exist. Man's highest purpose is to extract the sparks of good from the evil. Obviously, this is no simple task. It demands a high degree of self-perfection before it can even be attempted. But the mission of mankind on earth is to withdraw the spiritual good from its captivity. Now he quotes from the Mesilat Yesharim, Rabbi Chaim Luzzatto. It is known to all who have been given understanding that the soul of David was clothed in the shell of Moab, and that it was freed from Moab through Ruth. Concerning this, too, Scripture says, "Who could withdraw purity from impurity?" So he quotes the Midrash above that Rabbi Sherman just quoted in his introduction. These were the intentions of the inscrutable wisdom of the Creator in guiding his world, to bring every act to its proper path. Every act of God travels through byways, often in complex, crooked ones. It makes me think of the highways and the byways the Master tells, and the Master talks about in the parable of the wedding feast. For such as occur to all great souls as they go among the shells, quote unquote, of impurity to capture and extract the good. So that Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto says in Mesilas Yesharim. Continuing on, the sparks of goodness are scattered throughout creation. One was in Lot and remains glimmering even in the moral filth of Sodom. To salvage that spark, God sent the angel Raphael, who, after healing Abraham, went to Sodom to save Lot, bearer of the spark that would become the soul of David. It went down the generations until the time came for it to leave the impurity of Moab and enter the Jewish nation through Ruth. So I think that that's such a beautiful way that he's looking at it in terms of bringing, a positive from a negative and sparks of holiness being like a negative areas. I think part of the problem is that it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to have all these people from the nations who have very questionable pasts, etc., until you understand the revelation that we have through our sages, the sages in the apostolic writings, etc., where they talk about the mystery of the nations being brought in through the Messiah, and being brought to holiness through the Messiah. Because if you think every single person who doesn't have Jewish heritage, whether they're halachically Jewish or whatever it is today, if they don't have an ancestor who was Jewish, their ancestors were pagan. Just like Jewish people's ancestors were pagan once before, during Terach as well. So I mean, there's really not a difference, but it just pushes things backwards a little bit. But every non-Jewish person, their ancestors, their great 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 grandfather, whatever it is, they were idol worshippers. Whether they're Europeans or Asians or whatever the scenario is. And so it's just interesting to me though, because the book of Ruth, I think, gives us that hint, into that mystery of what's going to happen. Here's a Moabite woman, not even a Moabite woman, but a Moabite princess, somebody of Moabite royalty, according to the sages. And what happens is she's in the genealogy of the Messiah. From her comes Yishai, if I'm remembering correctly, and from Yishai obviously comes David, and then the rest is history. So I just think it's helpful because we can see, oh, now I understand why there's so many shady characters, so to speak, in the Messiah's lineage. And it makes perfect sense for us to see, oh yeah, well, this is a picture of non-Jews and their non-Jews being brought to holiness and even being elevated to such a position to be in the lineage of Messiah, obviously foreshadowing the time through Messiah that all nations will be brought to holiness. So, okay, so that's us today. And what we're going to be doing going forward is we're going to be starting a new series tomorrow. And so stay tuned for that. God willing, we'll be able to go ahead and start working in that series, and we'll announce obviously tomorrow what we're going to be doing. But thank you so much for joining me through all the sessions and learning through the Book of Ruth. And you should all be blessed and have a great day in every way. God bless.